Why did you marry me if you knew I came here to destroy you? The Duke looked at his new wife across the candlelit table. Because, he said quietly, you are not the person I was waiting for. Isabella's fingers tightened around the letter, hidden beneath the table. What does that mean? It means your father sent you here to kill me. Her breath caught. The Duke leaned closer. And he forgot to tell you that I already know who killed your mother. Isabella went completely still. Because the man sitting across from her was supposed to be her greatest enemy. And yet, he had just spoken the one secret that could destroy her entire family. 3 days earlier, Isabella Bellandi had descended from a hired carriage at the iron gates of the Valdieri estate, with one thought fixed inside her chest like a blade. Find the evidence. Copy it. Get out. She had not expected the gates to be open. She had not expected the servants to be waiting. And she had absolutely not expected the Duke of Valdieri to be standing at the top of the stone steps in the late afternoon light, perfectly still, watching her arrive as though he had known the exact moment her carriage would appear on the road. He was tall, considerably so, dark wavy hair, gray eyes that caught the light without warmth, and the particular stillness of a man who had long since stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. The housekeeper beside Isabella whispered something under her breath and immediately looked away. The servants did not speak. They straightened. Isabella understood in that instant why her father had warned her so many times. It was not the Duke's title that made him dangerous. It was the fact that he appeared to need nothing. He extended his hand. Lady Isabella, he said, welcome to Valdieri. She took his hand. She held his gaze. She said, thank you, Your Grace, in a voice she had been practicing for 3 weeks. He said nothing else. That evening, they dined at a table long enough to seat 20. They sat at opposite ends. The food was excellent. The candles were generous. The silence between them lasted the entire meal, broken only once when the Duke asked, without looking up from his plate, whether she had found the journey comfortable. She said yes. He nodded, and Isabella returned to her rooms that night with a feeling she had not anticipated and did not welcome. He had not asked her a single question about herself. Either he was entirely indifferent to her, or he already knew every answer. When a person who should be demanding explanations asks for none, they have already decided what they believe. Silence, in the right hands, is not peace. It is the most disciplined form of control. In the weeks that followed, Isabella and the Duke performed their marriage with the precision of two people who had studied the role carefully and trusted none of the other players. At Sunday Mass in the village chapel, she walked beside him. At dinner with his estate managers, she sat at his right hand and spoke when addressed. At the reception held by the Contessa di Mora in Turin, the first occasion on which the Duke's new wife was formally presented to Piedmontese society, Isabella wore deep gold, smiled at exactly the correct moments, and said nothing that could be repeated against her. The Duke watched her do all of this. He did not compliment her. He did not interfere. He offered his arm when propriety required it, and released at the moment propriety permitted. But Isabella noticed something. Every time she moved toward the eastern wing of the estate, a servant appeared, quietly, without being summoned, standing at a doorway or crossing the corridor at precisely the moment she reached it. She was being redirected, gently, consistently, without a single word spoken about it. She changed her approach. She began waking before dawn. She walked the gardens. She mapped the ground floor for memory. She identified which floorboards made no sound and which doors could be opened without the latch catching. She was not waiting for an opportunity. She was building one. In aristocratic Italian households of the early 19th century, a wife's legal authority extended only as far as her husband permitted. She could not open correspondence addressed to the estate, enter rooms designated as her husband's private study, or conduct any financial transaction without his written consent. Any evidence she obtained without his knowledge would be inadmissible before a civil court, but entirely sufficient for the military tribunal her father's contact in Turin had already convened in private. Isabella knew this. She was not building a legal case. She was building a confession. The ledger Isabella's mother left behind contained one more entry, the last one, written in a different ink on a different date. Isabella did not read it aloud in the tribunal. She has not yet shown it to the Duke. It names one more person. And that person is not Eduardo Valdieri. If you want to know what that final entry says, you already know what to do. On the 19th day of her marriage, Isabella waited until the household was fully quiet, took the small iron tool she had carried from her father's house sewn into the lining of her traveling trunk, and walked to the Duke's study door. She did not need the tool. The door was already unlocked. She stood in the corridor for a long moment. Then she went inside. The study was ordered and without sentiment. Maps of the Piedmont estates. Correspondence sorted by date. A locked strongbox on the lower shelf that she did not touch. And on the desk, laid open as though recently read and deliberately left, a single document. It was a copy of her parents' marriage contract, with a clause she had never seen before. She was reading the third paragraph when the voice came from the doorway behind her. "You read Latin." She did not turn around immediately. She made herself finish the line she was on. Then she turned. The Duke stood in the doorway in his shirt sleeves, a candle in one hand. His expression was exactly as it had been the day she arrived. Unreadable, unhurried. "My father insisted," she said. "He insisted on a great many things." The Duke looked at the document on the desk, then back at her. "That clause transfers your mother's family estate to your father's creditors in the event of your marriage to a member of the Valdieri house. Did you know that?" She had not known that. She kept her face very still. "Why would you show me this?" she said. "I did not show it to you. I left it on my desk." He set the candle on the shelf. "You chose to read it." He left the room. Isabella stood alone in the study with the document in front of her, and the slow, unwelcome realization that he had wanted her to find it. The following morning, she found a small brass key on her pillow. No note. No explanation. She recognized the shape of it. It matched the strongbox on the lower shelf. This was her first plot turn, and she chose to take it entirely on her own terms. She did not ask what it opened. She did not seek permission. She went back to the study that afternoon, opened the strongbox herself, and read everything inside it before replacing each document in its exact original position. What she found did not destroy the Duke. It destroyed everything she had believed about her own father. When someone hands you the key to their secrets, ask yourself one question before you turn it. Are they giving you the truth, or are they trusting you with the burden of it? There is a difference, and the difference will cost you. The strongbox contained 12 years of the Duke's private investigation. Isabella sat on the study floor for 2 hours and read all of it. The official record stated that her father, the Marchese Bellandi, had falsified land deeds belonging to the Valdieri estate, triggering a debt obligation that had driven the Duke's elder brother Lorenzo to financial ruin and, subsequently, to his death. That was what the courts had recorded. That was what the Duke's family had believed for 12 years. That was what Isabella had grown up understanding as the source of his hatred. But the documents in the strongbox told a different story entirely. The land deeds had been falsified, but not by her father. The forgery was skilled, precise, and carried the seal of a notary in Turin who had been in Valdieri service for 30 years. The Duke's own notary. And beneath that document, there was a sworn statement, obtained privately, witnessed by a priest in the village of Barolo, from a former clerk who had carried the forged deeds between offices. The clerk named the person who had commissioned the forgery. He had not named the Marchese Bellandi. He had named Conte Eduardo Valdieri, the Duke's uncle. Isabella sat with that paper in her hands until the candle beside her burned low. Her father had not destroyed the Valdieri family. He had been made to appear as though he had. And her mother, who had worked as a legal secretary for the Bellandi household before her marriage, had been the one person in the right position to discover the truth. 6 years ago, her mother had begun asking questions. 6 years ago, her mother had died. The physicians had recorded it as fever. Isabella had believed that. Until this moment, Isabella replaced every document, locked the strongbox, returned the key to the Duke's desk rather than her own room. That was a message. She intended him to understand it. That evening she did not go down to dinner. She sat at her writing table and read, for the fourth time, the letter she had carried from her father's house sewn into the same trunk lining as her iron tool. The letter her father had pressed into her hand the morning she left for Valdieri. The letter he had told her to open only if she found herself in danger. She had been intending to open it from the first day. She had been waiting until she had enough information to understand it. Now she read it properly. Her father had not sent her to the Duke to destroy him. He had written it plainly, in the careful hand of a man who understood that plainness was all that remained to him. I sent you to Valdieri because I have exhausted every other means available to me. The Duke of Valdieri has been investigating his uncle for 4 years. He is closer to the evidence than I am. He will not trust me, but he may trust you, if you give him reason to. Do not lie to him about who you are. He already knows. Tell him what your mother found. He does not yet know that part. Without that piece, he cannot complete what he has been building. And without him, neither of us survives long enough to see the truth reach a court of law. Isabella put the letter down. She looked at the ceiling of the bedchamber that had belonged, 60 years ago, to the Duke's grandmother. She had arrived in this house with an iron tool, a cover story, and 12 years of grief pointing in entirely the wrong direction. And her father, her careful, secretive, infuriating father, had sent her here not as a weapon, as the final piece of evidence. She stood up. She smoothed her gown. She walked downstairs. The Duke was still at the dinner table, working through correspondence. He looked up when she entered. She sat down across from him without being invited. My mother kept a record, she said. She wrote everything down. Names, dates, the seal numbers on the documents. She hid the record in the binding of a household ledger. She knew no one would search, because it was written in her mother's language, and no one in our household could read it except her. Isabella folded her hands on the table. And me? The Duke set his pen down. Where is the ledger now? He said. In my father's library. In Turin. She held his gaze. I can write to him tonight. The ledger will be here within 4 days. The Duke was quiet for a long moment. You came here to destroy me, he said. Not as an accusation. As a statement of fact. Yes. And now? She met his eyes directly. Now I am telling you what my mother died to protect. I suggest you decide quickly what you intend to do with it, because your uncle is not a patient man, and I've been inside this house for 19 days. The most dangerous assumption any of us can make is that we already know the full story. Isabella spent years grieving in one direction and planning in another, and both were pointed at the wrong person. Certainty, without complete information, is not strength. It is the most expensive mistake you will ever make. The ledger arrived in 3 days, not 4. The Duke's investigators had already identified 6 of the transactions recorded in Isabella's mother's careful, column-perfect notes. Within a week, the evidence was sufficient to compel a formal review before the military civil tribunal in Turin, the same body her father's contact had been quietly preparing for months. Conte Eduardo Valdieri was summoned. He did not attend. He was found 2 days after the summons was issued, attempting to board a vessel at Genoa harbor. He had with him a leather case containing documents, a significant sum in banknotes, and a forged travel permit bearing the Duke's signature. He was detained by the harbor authority. The case went before the tribunal. Isabella sat in the anteroom outside the tribunal chamber for 6 hours. The Duke sat beside her for 4 of them, without being asked, without explaining why. At the end of the 4th hour, she said, "You knew I had come here to destroy you." "Yes. And you let me search your study." "I left the door unlocked," he said. "There is a distinction." "Why?" He looked at the stone floor of the anteroom for a moment. Because your father's letter told me what you were carrying, he said. And I understood that you would never simply hand it to me. You would need to arrive at it yourself. He paused. You are not a woman who accepts what she is told. Isabella looked at him. You have known my father for 12 years. I have despised your father for 12 years. There is a difference. Something shifted in his expression. I am beginning to understand that it was not the same thing as knowing him. The tribunal found Conte Eduardo Valdieri responsible for the falsification of the Valdieri land deeds. The conviction was formal, public, and recorded in the civil register. The Marchese Bellandi's name was formally cleared. Isabella stood in the courtyard of the tribunal building in the late afternoon light of a Turin October and read the posted notice for a long time. The Duke came to stand beside her. If you had known the truth before our wedding, he said, would you still have married me? She considered the question properly. She owed him that. No, she said. He was very still. Then she turned to look at him. I would have married you sooner. Something crossed his face that she had not seen there before. Not the careful stillness of a man maintaining control. Something underneath it. Something that had apparently been waiting a considerable time to reach the surface. He offered her his arm. She took it. And they walked back through the streets of Turin together. Not as enemies had made a truce, and not yet as everything else, but as two people who had both spent 12 years pointing their grief in the wrong direction, and had finally, at significant cost, managed to find the right one. Isabella and the Duke did not fall in love because they chose to. They fell in love because they both chose truth. Even when the truth was painful, even when it required trusting someone they had every reason to fear. The real enemy in this story was never the person they were told to hate. It was the silence that kept them apart. If there is one thing to carry from this story, it is this. The people we are taught to blame are not always the people responsible. Investigate before you condemn. Ask before you decide. And never mistake certainty for understanding. This story was built on a single question. What happens when two people spend years hating each other for a crime neither of them committed? The Duke and Isabella are not enemies who fall in love despite their differences. They are two people who discover, slowly and at real cost, that they have been fighting the same battle from opposite sides of a wall that should never have existed. What makes their romance credible is that neither of them chooses it easily. Isabella does not soften toward the Duke because he is handsome. She softens because she watches him do the harder thing. Repeatedly, and without requiring recognition for it. The Duke does not trust Isabella because she is his wife. He trusts her because she earns it, in a situation where trust itself is the most dangerous thing either of them can offer. The villain of this story is not a cruel man in an obvious sense. He is a patient man. And patient cruelty, dressed in the language of family loyalty, is the kind that does the most lasting damage. That is the real lesson beneath the romance.